Okay, all good to go for you. Thank you.
Ellen, you hear that? I need to copy.
I will do a brief introduction. Welcome to the development seminar for this week. We're in our second episode of our Officers Cup series. I like to do little series as if I'm running a TV show. So in our second episode of Officers Cup, we have the legend, Umbar Sandhu, the winner of Officers Cup 2021, here to give us a seminar about how to give first speeches in the format of impromptu. So without further ado, take it away, Umbar.
So true.
My brain is
very
short.
Welcome to my first speaker seminar. Are any of you speaking first at Officers Cup? So exciting. And the rest of you, are you speaking at Officers Cup? Second? Second. Say thank you. Hello, nice to meet you. Say.
Is there still time to sign up?
Winter Shield, there is time to sign up.
Okay.
I have heard. If you're a second speaker, two of you, say thank you to the first speakers in the room. First speakers are the MVPs of Officers Cup, and you know, it's traumatic. You have 5 minutes and you have to go up and speak. It's really sad. So buy your first speaker some chocolates. That's my first tip. For the second speakers, free tip for the seminar for them. But this is about first speakers. So a little bit about me. I didn't make a team for my first Officers Cup, but I won it last year. So I think that's kind of cool. Good vibes. I also have a lot of Officers Cup experience. I've judged it technically 3 times. The first 2 times I traineed, and then I actually properly judged it. What else have I done? Yep, I speak first a lot and really like reply speeches, but I gave the reply speech for the Australs series. So I decided to switch it up. I used to speak second a lot. I still haven't spoken first longer than I've spoken second. So I think, you know, have lots of thoughts about learning to be a first speaker. So hopefully those will come across today. This is going to be like really short. It's my disclaimer slide, because I think officers, like all the speaker roles, have lots of overlap with one another. And obviously like what you do in prep will determine how your first speech goes and so on. So obviously feel free to ask questions about any part of Officers Cup. I would obviously really encourage that because I do not have enough content to speak for an hour. And obviously if you've heard advice before, if the advice is conflicting from what Liam said last week or from what Shar and Aisha say in the next 2 weeks, like, don't worry about that. Obviously the way you debate is like trial and error, like try out all the different methods, whatever works for you, works for you. You know, people can have different thoughts about the same thing and they can all be right. So that's all good. Awesome. Some general advice about Officers Cup. I have canvassed some smart people, and these are the thoughts. So the first is my thought, which is go get a coffee with your Officers Cup teammate. And if you aren't already best friends, Winter Shield as well, this applies, just like any debating in general. If you're going to a tournament with someone, go hang out with them. If you're not friends yet, do that like New York Times 36 questions thing, get to know each other. Especially for Officers Cup, if you can understand the way that your partner thinks and how they talk on the prep bench, that will make a bigger difference than any number of practices you do, because if you can't get along in prep time and if you don't understand when your partner needs material from you or any of those things, like it doesn't matter how good you are at debating because your case will not mesh. So get along with your partner, and if you don't already, work on that to fix it, and that'll make you really good at Officers Cup. The second is some advice from my friend Bridget, who says consistency is king. Officers Cup, you only have 15 minutes of speaking time for your team, which is not a lot of speaking time. And if you are running multiple cases, if your case is changing significantly between the 3 speeches you have, you are not going to be able to build a consistent narrative that convinces the judge. So use that 15 minutes really strategically. Make sure that you and your partner are on the same page. The case you run at first should largely be the case that you have at reply. Obviously, you like go deeper into it, add layers of nuance and stuff like that. But the worst thing that you can do is be flip-flopping on what you think the debate looks like. If your first speaker says something, run with it as best as you can at second, because if you change it, it will be very, very difficult to win the debate. You can do it in some instances, but general rule is the more consistent the picture you build, the more likely you are to convince the judge that the picture you're building is correct. Third, again, this is like another take on team vibes. Obviously, when you read a motion and you do your like 20 seconds of silent prep, sometimes you will think of different ideas for what the case should look like. In general, it's best to defer to your first speaker. Obviously, it becomes case dependent, and the better you get to know each other and the more practice you do, you'll get better at kind of working out what to do. But if you've only got 5 minutes to prep and someone is getting up to give a 6-minute speech at the end of that 5 minutes, it will be very difficult to explain a case that doesn't make sense to that first speaker in that 5 minutes. And if that case comes out really clunky, they say the wrong thing, it's very difficult to win the debate. The second speaker is lucky because they have a bit of time to kind of think about what the first speaker says, how the other team responds to it. So if you genuinely cannot come to agreement at the end of a minute into prep, unless the case is like horrendously wrong, help the first speaker prep what they think is right. And that isn't just like me being first speaker bias vibes. Ailey, who's like an amazing second speaker, gave me and Zach Wong this advice when we did our first officers run together, and it was very helpful. It just means that you can run the case best at first. You can give a really compelling like worldview of what the debate looks like, and then build on it and, you know, fix anything that you need to at second. Obviously, that's a lot harder to do if your first doesn't understand the case and says things that might be incorrect, and then you try to fix it at second, and the other team's just like, sorry, we know what the debate's about, and all that stuff. Fourth piece of advice, Will Miller, who amongst many other things was also a finalist in 2020, his top tip was to do lots of practice debates and learn some kind of stock cases that you can run. 5 minutes of prep time is obviously not a lot of time to go really in depth when you're talking to your teammate. So if you've done lots of practice about lots of different topic areas, and, you know, maybe even take more than 5 minutes in those practice to kind of talk about what the best case looks like, if you get a motion that's similar or has similar arguments, then you and your teammate kind of know what to run already. So you can just look at each other and say, I'm going to run this argument. We already know how it goes. So let's brainstorm around other stuff that we can add to tailor it to the case. Obviously, the bigger that your like kind of case knowledge or content knowledge is going into the tournament, the more time you can save to optimize that 5 minutes. So obviously, like, lots of practice in general, but officers especially, like, even if you just have time to do a 5-minute prep, do those preps as often as you can, because the more cases that you have stored in your head, the quicker it will be for you to like get that done at the tournament and be able to write those things. Dush, who is on the Edge core for the tournament this year, advises be simple when you're running cases. If you be too big brain, judges will not know what you were talking about. I think the best way to kind of think about this in terms of how you prep for the tournament and how you run cases as a first speaker is you really should be trying to prove one big benefit or one big harm in each debate. The more time you spend splitting up into misty points, the less time you can spend on building a consistent worldview that the judge can buy into. It is almost always better to prove one thing well than to try and prove a lot of like little things. Obviously, like, all of these rules can be broken if the moment calls for it, but general advice. And then final advice from Joe Gary is to sometimes pick F. Obviously, you will have to pick motion sometimes. You'll have to pick side sometimes. Neg gives you a little bit more time for prep, but sometimes motions can feel less intuitive on the negating side. It's okay to pick F. You also get the added benefit of throwing the other team off because they've probably been preparing the F for a minute, and then you say you want to do F, they'll panic. So you don't always have to default to neg, and just keep that in mind depending on what motions are. Awesome. Actual advice for first speakers. So I think this is kind of like a generic vibe on how to structure a first speech. Have a really, really short introduction. Basically anything that you say in your introduction that gets repeated again is a waste of time. So, you know, maximum like 15, 20 seconds. like all you're doing is catching the judge's attention. The real meat of your material comes out later in your speech. In terms of clear model or framing, obviously if it's a policy debate, make sure you actually do the model. It's very easy to forget that when you only have 5 minutes to prep, and then the entire debate becomes very confusing because no one knows what your side actually stands for. So no matter what side you're on, I think it's useful to have like 30 seconds just being like, what we support in this debate is. Make sure you and your partner are on the same page about this. When I did my first Officers' Cup with Zach Wong, we had a motion about wealth taxes. It was like, this house supports a wealth tax. We were on F. I asked Zach to help me because I don't understand taxes. He wrote down 50 under model. So I went up and said, we support a 50% wealth tax, which was really bad. And apparently people don't like that. And we lost the debate by a lot. So make sure the model is really clear and that you both agree, because it looks really embarrassing if your first speaker says silly things. So that's kind of clear model, framing, characterization, all of that stuff goes in that first minute of your speech. And basically kind of, if you get the characterization right, you almost certainly that will be the basis for how you win the debate, because Officers' Cup is not as technical as other debating styles. It really is just like an act of persuasion. And the better that you're able to convince a judge that you're telling the truth by like, talking about people's incentives or explaining why the world looks the way that you think it does, which mostly comes out in your framing and characterization, the more likely you are to convince the judge that all of the analysis that you say later is true. Debate winning vision, that's in its own box, because it is similar to characterization, but it kind of ties into that whole idea of you have one thing that you want to prove, and everything that your first speaker does should be saying what that vision is. So if you have a motion that's like, this house supports a wealth tax, your debate winning vision is what you tell the adjudicator to convince them to support that. So you might say, the way we're going to win this debate is by showing that we get a radically more equal society. And everything that you talk about for the next 6 minutes is going to be focused on that radically equal society. And anything that you do that is not about that is therefore a waste of time, because that's the vision that you're selling the judge on. And I think it's even more important in Officers' Cup than other like speaking styles like BP or joint, because you don't actually get extra points for like being able to prove MISCI benefits, because it's such a short speaking format. Both teams only have 15 minutes to make their case. Any time you spend on MISC stuff means that your core case isn't going to extend margins for you. It's just going to be a case that's less compelling than the other team running a very simple case. Then you might have heard of like different ways of kind of framing each point you make, like context, analysis, impacts. That's how I do them. Credit to Connor O'Brien, who I think gave a seminar about how to structure points. At most, you'll probably have 1 or 2 points in a speech, and that's fine. Like, you have 6 minutes. It's not a lot of time to delve into the weeds of lots of points, but you want to make sure that you do hit those 4 specific things, or however many things, however you've been taught in each point, because anything that you miss there obviously makes the point less compelling. So your context is you explaining what the world looks like, what the problem might be under the status quo, the reasons why people behave the way they do in the world that you're painting. The analysis you give is explaining, like, sorry, the meme's like getting to me. The analysis is the stuff that, like, explains why people will respond the way they do when you add in whatever change you support or whatever change the other team does. The comparative is really important because Officers' Cup, obviously both teams have their one, debate winning vision. Responsiveness at Officers' Cup is kind of different to how you respond in joint. You don't have to hit every single point that the other team runs, but you do want to be really comparative in terms of the broad picture that teams are trying to paint. Melissa, do you remember any of the motions for trials?
I remember one really well.
Not that one. Any other motions?
The parent voter one, whether you should get an extra vote for each child that you have.
Yeah. So if a motion is like all parents should have an extra vote for their kids, And one of the points you might run might be about how parties change their policy based on that. You want to be really clear about explaining what policy looks like on either side of the world, because obviously you can talk about, we think parties care more about children in a world where parents have extra votes for them. But unless you're showing why they don't do that under the other team's side, you're not really defending yourself against attack. And then finally, impacting, and I'm bad at this sometimes. It doesn't matter how nicely you explain a point if you don't explain what it means and what it does in the real world. And so you will probably hear this advice a billion times at Officers Cup and any tournaments in the Officers Cup format. Make sure you do the simple stuff of explaining what impacts are, and not just like in abstract, but really like dumb it down a lot. Talk about what it means for individuals on the ground. If a motion is about, say, like increasing like job seeker benefits, what does that mean for a person who's on the job seeker benefit? What specific additional goods can they buy every week that really improve their quality of life? What does an improvement of quality of life mean? All of these little things that you do in terms of impacting is that kind of narrative building that shows the judge why your world is a good one. And that's what they'll give you wins on. Does that all kind of make sense in terms of like what it means to claim impact? Because you can, have like 18 mechanisms, but if you don't explain what those mechanisms do, the point's just kind of like, cool, that's like nice theory, but whatever. So make sure you impact. And then I think the final thing, just in terms of like how you would structure a first speech, is if you're a first neg speaker, definitely prioritize your case. And obviously you yourself will understand how to best prioritize your case in terms of timing. My vibe is that by 2 minutes, you want to be moved on from rebuttal and onto your own case. But that's obviously debate dependent. Like sometimes you might integrate and just do your case. But in terms of responsiveness, your job as a first speaker is only to hit the key thrust of the other team's case. If they ran missed points, don't spend time on them, because if they're not debate winning, then you should be prioritizing your material, which is debate winning. Obviously be in like constant communication with your second about the stuff that you're not going to respond to. Make sure your second is listening carefully to the rebuttal you do give, so that they can pick up on any areas that you did not cover. Obviously make sure you do respond to stuff, but I think the key thing is just like, what is the F trying to prove? Respond to that bit, move on, because you have to get your case and your comparative vision out first. Awesome. I think my hot take about officers is that, like, in almost all instances, the debate is decided by the end of the first speeches, and the seconds can like a really good second will be able to do a lot to like change the judge's mind. But if you haven't won at first, it's very, very difficult to come back from that, because you don't have a lot of speaking time. And, sometimes really good reply can do the thing, but you really want to try and win at first. So here are some tips I have for winning at first. And again, this is like quite similar to what I've already said, but more focused at like winning the debate, not just things that you have to do. So obviously the speaker that has the clearest vision of what the ideal world in the debate looks like and how to get there, and is able to articulate that to the judge, will almost always win the debate, because everything that a second speaker is doing is just adding to that vision and explaining why one is more likely than the other. But if you don't make it clear what the ideal world is at first, it's very difficult for a second speaker to then go on and explain why one is more likely, all those kinds of things. So as a team, you want to make sure that your first speaker knows what your end goal is for the debate, and that it comes out as best as you can so that you're able to explain it. This isn't, I'm not trying to be like, you can't win if you don't win at first. I fuck up the case a lot of times, but you can save it at reply, you can save it at second, it's all good. It's just like, generally, if you have all these things, that will decide what the second speaker is actually able to do after that point. So please don't panic. You're all very good first speakers or second speakers. It's all chill. The second is grounding analysis in reality, and that kind of ties in with painting a picture of the ideal world. I think sometimes if you are used to like joint scroll or Austral's format where you have to have lots of mechanisms explaining why things are true, you tend to debate in abstract. So like you're like, theoretically, if a person has these constraints on them, this is what they might care about. If you have 6 minutes to give a speech, that sounds boring. The judge is going to tune out. They're not going to care. If you talk about the specific examples where a person's life is made better because they have more money, i.e. you can afford to pay for Netflix, that makes you happy because you have something nice to do in the evening. It sounds really stupid, but that's the kind of world building that judges will be like, I can tangibly envision what the impact of this point is. And the more specificity that you can bring to each point, the more likely it is that the judge is able to clearly see what your world looks like. The third is preempting or responding to the key opposition push. Responsiveness is obviously easier because you know what their key push is. As a team in your 5 minutes, it's not a lot of time, you do want to make sure you spend a few seconds thinking about what the negating team is going to run if you're on F, because you can give a case that's all well and good, but if the negating team comes up and runs a case that's completely different to what you anticipated and totally knocks yours out of the debate, it's very difficult as an affirming team to come back from that. You can come back from that. I probably missed the case in my semifinals last year. Shah was like quite good at being like, no, she didn't miss the case. So it's not the end of the world, but obviously if you're preemptive, that puts you on kind of good standing for what you will do further on in the debate. And the way to be preemptive is just like telling your second speaker, what is the neg team going to run and how am I going to integrate that into my case? And you only need to give like a line or two to be like, you know, the negating team's case might be X. We think it's less important. Moving on. As long as you've got that preemptiveness there, it flags to the judge that you have thought of it. You don't have to spend heaps of time on it. You can let your second speaker do all the hard work. But as long as you say it, the judge knows that somewhere in your case you were thinking about those things. And then, yeah, we've already said like claiming 1 billion missed points will never win you an officers' cup debate because you'll never be able to prove them to a great enough degree. So make sure you only focus on the stuff that is debate winning. Ooh. Officers debate life cycle. I kind of ran out of things to say, so this is my little flow chart of what you can do during an officer's speech. Yeah, like obviously all speeches are quite interconnected, but hopefully this is helpful. Prep wise, I think the thing that helped me most is that whenever I go into a debate, I already have all of my pieces of paper ready, regardless of what the topic is. I've got like, you know, this is where my context is going to go for this point. This is where the analysis is going to go. The impacting is going to go here. I've got my page with the setup already kind of like mapped out. So all I have to do is like plug in the dots. That's really useful because it means when you're prepping, you know which parts you haven't done yet. So that's all good. Obviously leave lots of space on your paper because if you're neg, you will obviously want to fill in bits where the other team is doing stuff. And make your second speaker work for you if you're a first speaker. I think this comes a lot with practice and like doing those 5-minute preps, working out how you can make your second speaker work for you. Cause like sometimes it's very difficult to be like, you need to think of this thing while I write other stuff down. But the more practice you do, the more intuitive it becomes. I know this sounds very vague, but like it is just like an interpersonal thing, like your teammate and you will work together in different ways depending on who that teammate is. Like I know a lot of people think Shar talks far too much in prep time. I think he talks the perfect amount in prep time. So you just have to like spend a lot of time practicing with your teammate. Don't be afraid to tell them to shut up if they're talking too much. They're your second speaker. They have all the time in the world to think. If you are a first speaker, again, you're probably literally oppressed because you only have 5 minutes to think. So your second speaker can do a lot of work for you. And so I think the way to do that is like tell them the specific parts that they should be thinking about while you're writing a point. So often if I am writing out like the analysis and I know what the mechs are, I'll tell Shar, like, can you take a second, think of the impacts? I'll come back to you in like 5 seconds and then, you know, list them off to me. I'll write them down. That's the kind of stuff that you want to be able to do with your teammate to make sure that you're optimizing that 5 minutes of prep time. because most of the time you'll have the same thoughts. Like most officers' debates are quite simple and intuitive. So talking about things that you both already know is a waste of time. And just like delegate work out, but mostly make sure the first speaker is like leading that process because they're the one that's going to speak. And if your second speaker is like rambling about something you already know, you don't have to be nice to them. Tell them to shut up and then apologize to them after the debate. Cool. If you're on the negating side and, first staff is giving a speech, obviously have your actual speech already written out before they start. You should really only think you have 5 minutes of prep, because if you extend that time out, then you're not listening to the other case, and then your speech is not going to be as responsive as it should be, and that puts you on a back foot already. So obviously think about responsiveness. If you can integrate rebuttal because your cases are already meshed really well, that is really good. The key thing is, though, to make sure that you're flagging during your speech which parts are responses, because otherwise judges will tell you off because your responses were implicit and it wasn't clear that you were actually responding. So make sure you're saying this material responds to what the affirming team has said because it proves X, Y, Z. Like, you want to be really clear, hold their hands like they're really stupid, because most of the time they will be quite tired and sleepy, and that will get you points. And then obviously, make sure you're hitting the most important material. Communicate a lot with your second speaker on the bench. They will probably have more of a big picture view of what's happening in the debate because you are thinking about the speech you're about to give in 3 minutes. So make sure you're using them to explain to you what is most important for you to respond to. If you're not going to respond to something, make sure you tell them so that they're able to make sure that's included in their notes. During your speech, don't be repetitive. If you say the same sentence twice, you're wasting time. Judges get really annoyed. So don't be repetitive. If you think you're going to be repetitive, rather than repeating the same sentence, think of more impacts, more examples of the real world. Even if you sound really slow and clunky while you're saying it, that is the nature of giving a first speech at Officers' Cup. No one's going to be like, oh my God, you stuttered, instant 60. But if you're able to give more examples, that lends more credibility to the argument you're making. And obviously stay focused. So it's very easy to get baited if a team says something silly and you know a lot of facts because you did a science degree and they said something that was not true scientifically. Think to yourself, is spending 2 minutes explaining how microbiology or something works going to win you the debate? Probably not. Say, that's false. Let's respond to what was actually debate winning. Make sure that you're in control of your speech. It's very easy to get really fizzed up because Officers' Cups debates are often really exciting. The motions are sometimes funny. If you get carried away, you will lose the debate. So make sure you're in control of what you're saying, and you're, trying to keep the judge on the path to your victory. And then finally, after your speech, unfortunately, this is not like joint scroll. You can't pawn your reply speech off to your second speaker. So you need to stay focused. Obviously, help your second speaker out. They'll be writing their speech during the next speech from the opposition team. You want to be making sure that they're responding to all the key points. Yep. I obviously think that debates are won and lost at first reply. The reasoning for that is if your reply does not consider the nuances that your second speaker adds, you will probably move the debate backwards. So make sure you're listening out for that. But obviously help them write a really good speech that is consistent with yours, because obviously if the case entirely changes, that's also really confusing for judges. So first speakers, they're in charge. They, have the first word, they have the last word, but you also get to shape what your second speaker does. You want to be on the same page, be consistent, all that stuff. Final thing. I actually think that first speaking is really tiring at Officers' Cup, and this is like unironic advice. You want to go into the tournament, the weekend, anything, feeling well rested. Like 8 speeches in a day is quite a lot. So work out what keeps you calm and in the zone, like eat some vegetables on the weekend. Unironically, have a good time in Dunedin. They'll have lots of kegs. Someone said 5 to 7, so that could be nice. But make sure that you're doing things that make you feel well rested and like are not going to have a stress headache all weekend.
No
all
more
those things.
violence against street signs. I swear to God, I
More
cannot do it again.
violence against
Oh my
street signs.
God.
Okay, that's me. Questions. Should I turn off how do I?
Go stop share.
Yeah,
And then go up to the thing that says live Facebook.
I see.
And then go stop.